Hi, I'm George, and this week we're going to have a look at a rebuild of the Horizon Sustainer. Now we're only going to show you the differences, only the new way we've built sections of it. There was a whole bunch of components that were the same, so you can have a look at the previous videos on how they were built. Anyway, so let's have a look at Charlie. We start with the new inner liner. Because we wanted to get the 0 and 90 degree fibers oriented the right way, for the inner liner we decided to use carbon fiber cloth rather than the sleeve. We are using 200 GSM 3K plain weave carbon fiber cloth from Solid Composites. Straight away we ran into a problem because we didn't have a good way to hold down the leading edge of the fairly stiff carbon fiber cloth, and especially on the slippery baking paper. The small diameter of the mandrel certainly doesn't help either. Trying to do this with 2.5 meter long piece of cloth is really difficult. If we taped it to the baking paper, then it would be difficult to remove the paper afterwards, if we could actually get the tape to stick properly to the baking paper. So we decided to first put on a single layer of 85 GSM fiberglass cloth in a couple of pieces, as full-length pieces are difficult to put on without any wrinkles. That's actually how Lumpy got its name. The leading edge of the lightweight and more flexible fiberglass cloth is easier to put on than the stiffer carbon fiber cloth. So you're probably asking, why don't we use lighter weight carbon fiber cloth, right? Well, two reasons. One, we already bought the 200 GSM cloth, and two, the heavier cloth is somewhat less likely to wrinkle at full lengths when compared to the lighter cloth. So this fiberglass layer forms the innermost layer of the pressure chamber. We let it cure overnight and leave it in place on the mandrel as it's far too flimsy by itself. We then used thin masking tape to carefully tape one edge of the carbon fiber cloth to this fiberglass layer. The tape sticks well to both and allows us to hold the edge correctly aligned along the entire length. When that was done, we rolled on 2 layers of the carbon cloth and could apply a good amount of tension without the cloth slipping. The tape just stays embedded in the pressure chamber between the innermost fiberglass layer and this carbon layer, so there is no issue. Normally we would add a layer of 85 GSM fiberglass cloth over the top of this for a smoother finish, but this time we decided to go with Peel-ply instead to save a little bit of weight. Again, we put the Peel-ply on in 2 pieces to make it easier to manage. The next day we pulled the Peel-ply off. Now this takes a bit of effort, and it also helps to leave one edge loose rather than completely wetting it down, so it's easier to pull off. You've got something to grab onto. The finish is quite nice once the Peel-ply comes off. For comparison, here's what the surface finish looks like with the 85 GSM cloth over the top, and here's the finish with the Peel-ply removed. We then remove the whole thing from the mandrel and extract the baking paper as normal. The tube is then trimmed square. You've seen how the top and nozzle end caps were made last time, so we'll skip those steps in this video. There's a link in the description to the videos that show you the details of how these were made. We first glued the top end cap into the inner liner with 24-hour epoxy. Next is the nozzle end cap. And again we use the Nozzle Alignment Jig to line up the nozzle with the rocket axis while it cures in place. It goes on the rotisserie to cure for a couple of hours. After a couple of days, when the epoxy was fully cured, it was time to check the whole inner liner for leaks. We put it in the pool and pressurized to about 100 psi. We look for any bubbles that might be emerging from the pressure chamber. This is an easy way to spot even very tiny leaks. There weren't any leaks, so we could continue with the next step. Once the inner liner was sanded, we put on the 2-inch 3K carbon fibre sleeve like Sandy used. The sleeve is put on dry as this makes it easier to pull onto the liner. It was then fully wetted out using a couple of foam rollers. When it was all stretched onto the liner, we wrap it with the 85 GSM fiberglass cloth. Again, this is done in a couple of pieces. We can't really use the Peel-ply easily on this step because it won't stretch easily around the top and nozzle end caps. Once cured and sanded again, it was time to attach the fins. The fins are first tacked on with 24-hour epoxy. This angle shows better how we use the alignment jig to make sure that the fins are aligned with the center line of the rocket. The fin filleting process is the same as shown in a previous video, and so we'll skip that step. Next we drill a hole in the top end cap. This holds a steel pin that attaches the shock cord to the rest of the rocket. We now need to attach the PVC ring at the top of the rocket that will mount the deployment mechanism. We are using a jig to make sure that it points in the right direction. Here we're just tacking it on with 5-minute epoxy. When that's set, we properly attach the rest of the ring with epi-glue. Again, we'll skip that step. We are using Lumpy's previous deployment mechanism, so it was simply a matter of tracing out the holes for the screws on the PVC ring and then drilling and tapping those holes. It was time now to pressure test the rocket using a hydro test. Here we're filling it completely with water. We then pressure tested the rocket to 900 psi to make sure there weren't any leaks. Here the rocket's undergoing the test. We had the camera only focused onto the nozzle end since that's where it was likely to leak. And up here are the pressure gauges. It successfully passed the test without any leaks, and so we were pretty happy about that. The fins were masked off and the rocket was then given a final sand with 240 grit paper. We again sprayed it with putty to fill in any small imperfections. We gave it about 3 coats. The next day we used 240 grit paper to wet sand the putty off, as this helps flush the putty out of the sandpaper and keeps the dust down. We then finished it off with 400 grit paper. We gave the rocket several thin coats of Duramax undercoat to help hide the dark carbon fibre patches. And finally, gave it several coats of white gloss enamel paint. I was less than impressed with this paint because it kept clogging up and the surface finish wasn't as glossy as I would have liked. I think we'll try a different paint next time. Then it was a matter of removing the masking tape from the nozzle, fins and the top end cap. Lastly, the rocket had a new decal put on. Unfortunately, when we had the vinyl decals made, we only had them made in white, yellow and black. And since all the black ones were used up, we decided to use the yellow, as white probably wouldn't have been very useful. So the rocket's now ready for flight, and we'll take it up to Malali in a couple of weeks, and we'll put together another video to show you how that went. In the next video, we're going to show you what we've actually done with Lumpy. Anyway, that's all for this week. No, wait, there's actually one more thing. The pressure test you saw in this video was actually the second test. Here's what happened on the first one. With the first couple of short bursts of air, the pressure climbed to 600 psi. With the next short burst, we would get to the pressure we needed. But when we tried, the inlet valve stuck open. So at this point, I'm pretty sure the carbon fibre in the pressure chamber said, "Hold my beer and watch this." Listen to the pressure chamber strain at this point as it gets the full tank pressure. Abort. This was actually quite loud and I wasn't sure what the sound was as we were behind a wall. I thought it was a leak of some sort. The pressure chamber is holding more than 1600 psi at this point, with no leaks. We tried the remote abort immediately, but it also didn't respond. So we pulled the manual pressure release string to release the pressure. We still don't know why the valve stuck open. After a lot of testing, we haven't been able to reproduce it again. Perhaps there was a brief loss of comms between the Raspberry Pi and the laptop. We don't know. We're just glad we had the manual pressure release override and that the scuba tank wasn't at its full 3000 psi. So that kind of tells us what the upper pressure limit could be for this rocket, and that's very encouraging. It really is all for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.